Mood follows action is the main understanding you need in order to improve your mental health, as well as the understanding that in order to improve it, you just need to wake up each day and do solids for your future self. Solids being the British slang for good deed. In other words, you need to make tomorrow as easy as possible for your tomorrow self by asking yourself in each moment of your life, what would tomorrow me want me to do right now? Within the context of sleep, nutrition, movement, connection, and life admin. That is the 30-second summary of this video. So if that all makes sense, feel free to click off this video now, and I wish you all the best in improving your mental health. But if you want 4 new perspectives on how to improve your mental health so quickly other people think you're on a permanent dose of ecstasy, then follow me. Here's point number 1. The first way to improve your mental health is to understand context-dependent memory. And in order to demonstrate what we mean by this, let's do a quick 15-second exercise. I just want you to close your eyes and simply try and imagine the first school you ever went to and see what memories come to mind. Okay? So close your eyes, try and imagine the first school you ever went to, and I'll tell you when to stop. Go. Okay, open your eyes. That was a quick exercise, so maybe some memories came to mind, maybe you struggled to think about anything at all. But the reason why I got you to do this is because I now want you to imagine how many more memories you would have access to if I physically took you to that school's campus. As we walked around the school, you might look at the reception area and say, oh, that's where I remember walking past this reception area when I had my first day. Or you would look at the playground and say, oh, that's where I used to play with my friends. Oh my God, there was this one time when, demonstrating that being at that school's physical campus would give you access to loads of memories you thought were long forgotten. So what does this demonstrate? Well, it demonstrates that the thoughts and memories your brain gives you access to at any point in time in your life are entirely dependent on the psychological and physical context you're in. So how does this relate to mental health? Well, you know those moments when you feel low, maybe you feel depressed, or you're in the grip of a very intense emotion. Let's look at depression, for example. You know when you feel depressed and you suddenly think your life has always been this way, and your life has always been a pit of doom and gloom. Yeah, that's a lie. That's not true. Your life hasn't always been this way. It's just you have convinced yourself that it has been this way because you're in the context of doom and gloom. So the only memories you have access to, unconsciously, are memories of doom and gloom. But why would your brain do this? The bottom line is because it's efficient for your brain to only think about the context in which it's in. Going a step further, the 2 brain regions that are involved in context-dependent memory, there's multiple, but the 2 main ones are the amygdala and the hippocampus. The amygdala is a small region of your brain which is largely responsible for detecting threats in your environment and noticing bad things that happen. And then it communicates with the hippocampus by basically saying, dude, this thing just happened, save this into long-term memory now, to which the hippocampus presses boom on the long-term memory save button, and then that experience becomes a memory. You can consider these 2 brain regions as the friends that are always freaking out, throwing flames on any fire that happens. In other words, meaning that bad things happen and then you form a memory on it and then stew on it. So, in order to counter context-dependent memory, what you need to do is strengthen your optimism circuits. So here are 2 simple ways in order to do so. The first way is to think opposite, and this is comprised of doing 2 things. First of all, whenever you're experiencing something that is causing you some form of discomfort, you first of all observe how you're responding to this experience emotionally, physically, and mentally. And then you ask, how would I be responding emotionally, physically, and mentally if I were having the same experience but thinking the opposite thought? To give you an example, let's say you're sat watching the TV of an evening but you're thinking about how much you hate yourself, okay? You're in a pit of self-loathing and you're just thinking about all the memories of the bad things you've done in the past and how you're such a lazy sack of potatoes or whatever. You're thinking about how much you hate yourself. Well, first of all, bloody hell was that? I just stepped on my Shakti mat. This is an uncomfortable experience for you. So you would like to change how you're responding to it. But first of all, you have to observe, well, how are you responding emotionally, physically, and mentally? Well, you tap in, you use this brilliant tool of your mind called metacognition, its ability to observe itself, and your tool of interoception, your brain's ability to become aware of sensations within your body. And you notice, well, your posture is slumped. You're also frowning, and you notice there's a pit of dread in your stomach. Well, now you ask, sorry, I keep having to adjust my shirt because my collar's getting loose. Now you ask, how would I be responding emotionally, physically, and mentally if I were having the same experience but thinking the opposite thought? Well, the opposite thought of hating yourself would be thinking about how much you love yourself. Maybe your posture would straighten, you notice. Then you would begin to smile. And then you would begin to feel a surge of gratitude and excitement in your stomach, which might even motivate you to stop watching the TV and instead do something you consider more beneficial, like go for a walk or cook a nutritious meal or do some journaling. Before we explain why this works, let's quickly cover one more example in the context of social anxiety. Let's imagine you're going on a first date and you're currently walking down a busy street, approaching a park in which you've arranged to meet this person on a first date. You've never met them before, so you're feeling very socially anxious. But you don't want to bring this social anxiety into the date. You would much rather transmute it into something a little bit more proactive, like excitement. Well, first of all, you have to notice that you're feeling something you would like to change. You observe, how are you responding to this event, walking to this place you've arranged to meet your first date, emotionally, physically and mentally? Well, you notice that you're trembling, your palms are sweaty, and mentally you're rehearsing the idea of failure on this date, running out of something to say and then the atmosphere becoming awkward. Now consider the alternative. How would I be responding emotionally, physically and mentally if I were having the same experience, walking towards this park to meet my first date, but I was thinking the opposite thought? In other words, how would I be responding emotionally, physically and mentally if I wasn't thinking about how socially anxious I am, but instead I was thinking about how excited I am? Well, my posture might straighten and I would demonstrate an openness to the world and other people, not just this first date, meaning I would smile more. I might catch other smiles from people I'm walking past on the street, which puts me into a good social momentum. I would feel a pulse of excitement in my stomach and I would start rehearsing the idea of what if this goes really well in my head before you meet the first date. That's an example in the context of social anxiety. So now let's consider, why is doing this important in the first place? Now, the reason why this think opposite part is important is primarily because of the first thing you need to do in order to think opposite, which is observe what's going on inside you mentally, physically, and emotionally. Because whenever you bring awareness to a behavioral pattern that you want to change, you've pretty much solved the problem. In other words, by bringing more awareness to a problem, you've solved it. As Alan Watts said, to understand the problem is to solve it. And as the author Sheryl Sandberg said, you cannot change something you're not aware of, but once you become aware, you cannot help but change. An analogy for awareness in terms of solving problems that Alan Watts gave, the British philosopher, is think of awareness as a light that you turn on in a dark room. If you walked into a dark room and you wanted there to be light, you wouldn't just try and pick up all the darkness and shovel it out of the room. No, you would just turn the light on. So that turning the light on is no different from you becoming aware of any problem you want to solve in your life. So become aware and you solve the problem. Now, taking this all one step further, what we're talking about here is the importance of your thoughts and changing them. And what this demonstrates is, in order to have a new way of responding to something, i.e. a new way of acting, you need to have a new way of thinking. And a new way of thinking creates a new response. An equational way of looking at all of this could be event plus same thinking would equal the same experience. But an event plus new thinking would equal a new experience. Now, just a quick interlude here. What we said at the opening of this video was mood follows action, right? And that encapsulates the idea that in order to change your behavioural patterns, you need to lead with action. Behaviour first, thoughts and emotions later. This is kind of saying the opposite. And the reason why I've put these two juxtapositions in this video is because this is a huge juxtaposition within the literature of psychology and neuroscience. On the one hand, there are many people who say, no, in order to change your behaviour, you need to lead with action. You need to start doing new things and cultivating new responses, and then let your thoughts, feelings, and identities catch up with that behaviour. But then there's other people who say, wait, hold on a minute. Your beliefs as a human being underlie all of your behaviours. So yeah, you can try and act differently, but if your beliefs and thoughts aren't in alignment with the new actions that you want to program into your behaviour, then you're not going to create any lasting change. What's my perspective on all of this? Well, both of those things are true. There are times throughout your life where you could take the forward momentum leaning of leading with behaviour. Do you know what? I'm not going to try and work with my thoughts and emotions. I'm just going to act in the way that I want to with this new desirable identity I want to form, and then I'll let my thoughts and emotions catch up later. That works. As the saying goes, you can't think your way into better behaviour, but you can act your way into better thinking. But then there are times in your life when the opposite is true. It is your thinking and the way you're relating to certain events and experiences that is tripping you up. So it would be worth it for you to sit with your beliefs and actually try and challenge the way you think towards particular things happening in your life, which is obviously the perspective we're having here, but I just wanted to give that as an explanation to demonstrate two things can be true at the same time. Now, taking this one step further, another reason why becoming aware of all of this stuff is important is because one of the big things that trip us up when in terms of feeling low mood and not feeling the way that we want is something called thought-feeling loops. And what this means is your mind and your body are always talking to each other. And they're doing so via the language of the brain, which is thoughts, and the language of the body, which is feelings and emotions. So when you begin to think something, your body corresponds that thought with the necessary emotion that maps onto it. So you begin to think how you feel, and then you begin to feel how you're thinking. So it becomes a, what's the word? Negative loop or self-fulfilling cycle. That's the thing I was thinking about. Which also explains this context-dependent memory point, because as you begin to think doomy and gloomy memories, you then start to feel doomy and gloomy emotions. Your brain is then trying to talk to your body saying, oh, what's going on? Oh, we're feeling pretty doomy and gloomy. Let me spark more doomy and gloomy thoughts because this is what's going on here. So by first of all becoming aware of what thought and feeling loop is going on inside of you, obviously you've brought awareness to the table, so the grip it has over you will likely subside. And then you can, I'm thinking out loud, by thinking opposite, which is considering the alternative to the current thought and feeling loop you're having, you're encouraging your brain to create a new psychological blueprint for you to slip into. Rehearse that psychological blueprint often enough and you'll have a new way of responding and a new way of being in the world. You'll create a new personal reality, a new personality. Okay, hopefully that all made sense. And the last thing I want to say here before we move on into the second thing you can do to strengthen your optimism circuits is this isn't an argument to think positive all of the time and deny all of your negative emotions. No, if you followed this channel for a while, you'll know that is the last message that I want to give out. Toxic positivity does more harm than good. This thinking opposite technique is something you can rely on in those moments when you feel your back is up against the wall, you're having a thought or feeling loop that you really don't want to have, and this is an opportunity for you to slip into the opposite of that by way of mental transmutation. You don't cast away the current negative experience that you're having. No, you simply slip into its polar opposite. Because always remember that emotions, in particular, exist along a continuum. Depression, happiness. Where depression is, happiness is always there. It's just a case of you're at one point along the continuum. There's always the opportunity to slip into the other. You just need to entertain the possibility of doing so. So yeah, it's not always about denying your negative emotions because they're important, as we all know. And last thing, this might not work all of the time because your current ways of responding to things are very strong because you've rehearsed these behavioural patterns for God knows how many years. Thinking opposite is like a glimpse into a new way of reacting to something and thinking. And it requires practice in order to make that new psychological blueprint like a second nature for you to slip into. So, point number 2. The last way to improve your optimism circuits is to imagine the potential of positive future events happening. In order to become more optimistic, you need to trigger the release of serotonin and norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is your brain's version of adrenaline, and there's no better way to do this than imagining the potential of future positive events happening. Specifically by doing this, you activate a region of your brain called the anterior cingulate, which plays a big role in regulating your amygdala. Remember, the amygdala is that small part of your brain that is responsible for detecting threats and bad things that happen to you. So, the bottom line here is, if you cannot answer the question of what are you currently looking forward to, then you need more things in your calendar. Days, weeks, months, or years from now for you to look forward to. Treat your life and the organisation of it with some seriousness. And understand if you have nothing you're currently looking forward to, you're missing out on some serotonin, dopamine and norepinephrine. As the saying goes, when sad, buy tickets. The famous self-development guy, Tim Ferriss, I remember in a podcast he said a few years ago that he always has something at least a year booked into his calendar for him to look forward to. Do it, guys, and you'll become more optimistic. Okay, moving into point number 2. Decide for something you want. If you put 2 rats in a cage, but wire that cage so that rat 1 can only get a dopamine hit when rat 2 presses a button, eventually rat 1 will show signs of depression. Similarly, if you put 2 more rats in a cage, but attach a electric shocking device to both of their tails, but wire the cage so that rat 2 can run on a rat wheel to stop the shocks, but rat 1 can't do anything, eventually rat 1 will show signs of depression as well. So what does this mean? Well, you're not a rat, but the amount of control you think you have over a situation determines how you feel towards it. For example, if you feel a low sense of control, you'll feel depressed. If you feel a high sense of control, you'll experience high agency and high energy. So the bottom line here is you think you feel happy when good things happen to you, but you actually feel happiest when you're in pursuit of a goal you've chosen. For example, pursuing a job feels better than randomly being offered one. Buying a cookie feels better than randomly being given one. And choosing to get up out of bed feels more empowering than waiting until you need a piss so you feel forced to get out of bed. So the key takeaway here is you need to engineer your decisions in your life so that they set you up to feel a solid amount of perceived control, not actual control. Here are 2 ways for you to do so. Ignore other people lecturing you on what to do with your life, because if you continuously abide by what other people are telling you to do, you're going to feel no sense of control in your life path. To give you further confidence to do this, 3 years ago I did an exercise in which I reflected on the 3 best decisions I've ever made and 3 worst decisions I've ever made in my life, to see the common themes amongst all of them. Long story short, my best decisions had the theme of everyone disagreed with me at the time, and my worst decisions had the theme of I was listening to what everyone else was telling me, or what everyone else was telling me to do. So don't do that. Instead, make good small decisions, not big best ones. Because when you try to make perfect best decisions, by the way, which don't exist, you trigger a part of your brain called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is involved in emotional decision making. What you want to do instead is trigger a part of your brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and you do so by just focusing on making good small decisions and being decisive. The importance, or an analogy to illustrate all of this, is let's imagine you're stranded in the middle of the ocean. You have no idea whether land is there, or there. What do we know? If you stay bobbing above the water, you will eventually drown. But if you just pick a direction and start swimming, the chances of you making it back to land are higher. Depending on the direction, of course. It's the same with mountaineering. If you're lost and you stay where you are and you don't have food supplies and you don't have survival skills, eventually you will die. You have to make a decision as to what direction you're going to take, which emphasizes the importance of just making quick, lightning fast decisions in your life so that your life story can continue. I like this illustration, it demonstrates this perfectly. So the summary of this point is just making good small decisions reduces your anxiety and worry, because anxiety is largely a consequence of having an overwhelm of decisions. Decisiveness in one area of your life carries over into other areas. It's a transferable skill. There was one last thing I wanted to say. Oh yes, as the author Oliver Burkeman says, anxiety falls away when you make a decision, because when you make a decision there's only one direction to travel, which is into the consequence of your decision. But now we've covered point number 2, let's think about how can you deal with the inherent uncertainty of life so as to improve your mental health. 2 more points. The second to last way to improve your mental health is to instill a practice of certainty. Let's face it, a lot of life is uncertain and a lot of things in life are outside of your control. For example, things outside of your control are politics, the weather, other people's actions, and whether Aldi has chocolate mini Weetabix stocked or not. Things that are uncertain are when you'll die, when other people will die, whether you'll meet your soulmate, whether everything will work out, whether those nudes you sent 10 years ago will resurface. So what you need to combat this lack of control and uncertainty is something you can rely on in a volatile world. Enter your practice of certainty. Your practice of certainty could be cooking your favourite meal, going to the gym, meditating, reading your favourite book in your favourite spot, or what have you. Your practice of certainty has to be completely self-governed, and you have to have complete control over it. In other words, you need to be able to do your practice of certainty no matter where you are in the world. And the reason why this would improve your mental health is because when everything is crumbling down around you and going tits up, you need things that you can rely on to still be there when everything is going wrong. Quick example, my practice of certainty each day is going to the gym. I realised about a year ago that everything could be going wrong in my life, but as long as I'm going to the gym every day, I am fine. And I just realised it as I was about to record this segment. If I hadn't been going to the gym every day for the God knows how long, my mental health would not be where it is right now. 100% not. Last rule for instilling your practice of certainty, it cannot involve other people because the actions of other people are completely outside of your control. For example, if your practice of certainty is going to a cafe every day at midday with your best friend, you're setting yourself up for potential failure because one day your friend might not be able to make it and then your practice of certainty it's gone wrong. So, can't involve other people, has to be completely self-governed, So my only question for you now is, what is your practice of certainty? Comment down below. Now let's finalise with telling you something you already know, but it's worth re-emphasising. Finally, exercise and sleep. You know we couldn't make a video about mental health and not mention these two bad boys because they're so important. But because you've heard these two words a billion times thrown at you in terms of you need to do them both and optimise them both, I'm going to give you everything as concise as possible, so here we go. Here are all the benefits of exercise in one big go. Exercise stimulates your brain's production of BDNF, brain-derived nootropic factor, which is essentially steroids for your brain. It makes your brain stronger, but it acts like fertilizer. You need to keep going with exercise in order to see the effects. Exercise also increases the firing rate of your serotonin neurons, meaning they produce more serotonin, which is great news for BDNF because serotonin stimulates the production of it and BDNF strengthens your serotonin neurons. So your brain is not only stronger, but it's happier. Win-win. Exercise also increases your brain's levels of norepinephrine, which is great news when it comes to depression because a contributing factor to depression is a reduction in your brain's norepinephrine levels. But a study in Germany found that intense exercise increases norepinephrine in your brain. This also helps us understand why most antidepressants target norepinephrine when you're depressed in order to increase it, but exercise does that for you. A second to last really important benefit of exercise, which I found to be true in my experience, is it increases the blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is this front part of your brain largely responsible for impulse control, decision making, rationality, that feeling of making the right decisions in life, knowing what you need to do and being on the right path. This is great to know, because this acts as a reset button then in those moments when you feel depleted. Maybe you feel depleted right now, you've been scrolling for a long time, for example. Let's say you wake up, you've been scrolling for 8 hours, it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you're just feeling drained. You've got no energy, you don't want to do anything, least of all exercise. If you do exercise, you will end that session feeling renewed, because what has happened? More blood has gone to your prefrontal cortex now, which means you're more capable to control your impulses. You've experienced this before, I'm sure. You know when you exercise and you now feel more capable to regulate all of your impulses and urges? Yeah, that's because your prefrontal cortex is online. When you're scrolling or doing something that is very fast, dopaminergically, your prefrontal cortex has gone offline, which is why you just scroll and scroll and scroll. Long story short, all of these technology companies are targeting the activation of our other brain regions rather than the prefrontal cortex. Because if your prefrontal cortex is online, then you know what you need to do and you're regulating your impulses. So exercise increases the blood flow to the PFC. Before we get into the last benefit of exercise, what we can think about here is by exercising, you are creating the conditions for your brain to be stronger, and your brain responds to this by making itself stronger. But you first need to create the conditions for that to happen. Exercise and your brain will reward you. Lastly, exercise encourages you to get more restful sleep, less REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which, relating back to depression, when you're depressed, you get more REM sleep because your brain is more active. But when you exercise, you're encouraged, or that enables you to get more restful sleep. So the positive flywheel becomes, when you exercise, you sleep deeper, you feel happier, you have more energy, you exercise more, and it just continues in this positive flywheel. So let's end this now on a very, very practical note. Especially if you're depressed or you're feeling low mood, always remember you're not going to want to exercise. But the easiest way to improve your mood is to do the very things you don't want to do. Always remember that. So, also remember, any exercise is better than none. You'll never regret a workout that you do. And if the thought of doing a workout is quite daunting for you, try and incorporate other ways of exercising into your day. Instead of taking the car somewhere, can you walk? Instead of taking the elevator, can you take the stairs? These little micro moments of exercise throughout the day add up. Trust me on that. And it doesn't always have to be going to the gym either. It can be taking long walks, doing cardio, joining a sport that you like to do, which also incorporates socializing into the activity as well. Doesn't always have to be going to the gym, although that is what works for me. So, I cannot give you a prescription in terms of antidepressant, but I can give you this brother from another prescription. I would like you to do 30 minutes of intense exercise per day until you sweat, and allow yourself 1 hour before bed for you to wind down without a screen. Maybe you get a piece of paper out, write down all of your worries right now and how you plan to just write down all of your worries, or go for a long walk and just allow your brain to digest the day and to unravel itself. Do these 2 things and your mental health will be amazing. So, in summary, I need to get a new shirt because my collar has been annoying me. Nevertheless, this is the summary. Counter context-dependent memory by thinking opposite. Decide for something you want, and remember, low perceived control, higher depression. Higher perceived control, greater agency and energy. Instill your practice of certainty that gives you something to rely on in a volatile and uncertain world, and make sure you exercise for 30 minutes per day till you sweat, if you can, and allow yourself 1 hour before bed to wind down and let your mind digest the day. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Stay disciplined, playful and dangerous. Adios, muchachos y muchachas.